Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Salaam Islamic Center's weekly webinar series. Now, our guest today is Dr. Sophia Pandya from Cal State Long Beach, the Religious Studies Chair, who's going to talk about the life and significance of Rab'ia al-Adawiyya. Welcome, Dr. Pandya.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kahtaji. Thanks very much for having me. I'd like to say assalamu alaikum to everybody. I'm just wishing them peace. And I would also like to say thanks to the Salaam Islamic Center for having me. And because it's the sacred month of Ramadan, I want to say Ramadan Mubarak to all the fasters and all the non-fasters. And welcome to everybody. I'd like to talk to you about my very favorite Sufi saint. Now, I have 3 children. But if I were to have a fourth, of course, I'm not going to, but if I had one, I would have named her Rabi'a, because Rabi'a just means the fourth, and because she's my favorite Sufi saint. She's one of my life mentors. So this talk is titled The Life and Significance of Rab'ia al-Adawiyya. And I am Professor Sophia Pandya. I work at Cal State University at Long Beach. Go Beach. The figure of Rab'ia al-Adawiyya, who died in approximately 801 of the Common Era, is well known amongst Muslims, and she's especially significant for those who study Islamic mysticism or topics surrounding Islam and gender, as perhaps the first and most revered wali or Sufi saint in Islam. There are many accounts of her life available from the medieval period, including biographical mentions and stories regarding Muslim Sufi saints, awliya, and mystics. And the image below is of her name. In modern times, stories and legends about her have been used to champion a variety of causes, including the egalitarian character of Islam, Sufi mysticism, feminism, and more. Hazrat Rabi'a is best known for her verses on divine love, and I'd like to recite some for you now. O my Lord, the stars glitter, and the eyes of men are closed. Kings have locked their doors, and each lover is alone with his love. Here, I am alone with you. Rab'ia is also well known for, many stories about things that she did in her lifetime that are useful for mystical purposes. So one of the stories, I'll tell it to you, and then we'll read the images. In one of the stories, she's walking down the streets of Basra, and in one hand she has a bucket of water. In the other hand, she's holding a torch with fire. And somebody comes to her and says, Rab'ia, why are you carrying a bucket of water and a torch? Why are you doing that? And she said, you stupid, the bucket of water is to douse the fires of hell, and the torch is to burn heaven, because people should do what they do, not because of fear of hell or because they want to try to get into heaven, but because it's the right thing to do, and it's the godly thing to do. So here we have these 2 images. One of them says, to the left we see, oh God, if I worship you for fear of hell, burn me in hell. And if I worship you in hope of paradise, exclude me from paradise. But if I worship you for your own sake, grudge me not your everlasting beauty. And the second image says, even if heaven and hell didn't exist, would it not be proper for us to obey him? He is worthy of worship without any other motive. In most accounts, Hazrat Rab'ia al-Adawiyya was born in the 8th century, lived in Basra, and died in the Common Era, 801. And she's referred to by various names, including Rab'ia al-Adawiyya, Rab'ia al-Qaysiyya, and Rab'ia al-Basriyya. Sometimes you'll just see her referred to as Rabi'a Basri, or just Rabia. Many people use the term Hazrat Rabia to refer to her because Hazrat is a title of esteem. Farid ad-Din, the famous Sufi mystic, he notes that Rabia was born into a destitute family. They were so poor they didn't even have blankets to wrap her in when she was born, nor oil to light the house with. Later, her parents died and she was orphaned, and she was sold into slavery. She was only freed when her master became impressed with her devout spirituality. And I'll tell you more about that story in a bit. Hazrat Rabi'a was likely of non-Arab and non-Muslim origin, and a maulat, or client, with ties of servitude to the al-Atiq clan. And she was the fourth daughter, thus named Rabi'a, which means the fourth in Arabic. So here's the story. Rabi'a is known by all of her biographers for praying, almost incessantly. And when she was a slave, her master one day saw a lamp illuminated over her head as she prayed. And he decided that it was a sin to keep such a devout woman, who would pray to the extent that a lamp would illuminate over her head, to keep her in slavery. And so he decided to free her. After being freed, she spent time in the desert, emerging to live a celibate life of asceticism. She never got married. She rejected her biological role, or her domestic role, for a spiritual one. Although she received marriage proposals, Rabi'a preferred to continue her quest for divine love. And indeed, she is most known for this quest of divine love. And she's one of the first Sufis, if not the very first Sufi, attributed with seeking divine love. Hazrat Rabi'a was well known during her lifetime for her many mystical activities, including her prayer, her fasting, and also teaching of other Sufis. So she had male Sufis and women as well, but the surprising thing is that she had male Sufis who would come and study at her feet. She was their Sufi Sheikha. She was their murshid, or Sufi guide. Rabi'a was famous for refusing to be distracted by wealth or luxuries. There was a moment in which somebody came up to her and said, Rabi'a, you look so cold. Would you like to have a blanket? And she said, sure, I'll take a blanket. But then when the person said, well, what color? Suddenly she became angry and decided she didn't want a blanket at all, because when he brought color into it, suddenly it seemed like a luxury. By the way, the image below says al-hub, which means love. This brings me to one of Rab'ia al-Adawiyya's most famous poems called Two Loves, and I'll read it to you. I love you with two loves, the love of passion and the love of which you are deserving. As for the love of passion, I'm too preoccupied with remembering you to remember anything else. And as for the love of which you are deserving, for you revealed to me the veil so that I may see you. I deserve nor praise for the one nor the other, but rather the praise for both is for you. So if you think about this poem, it takes a long time to really understand it, to have the poem unfold its meaning to you. But if you just think of it, this idea of two loves, one a love of passion, and the other that is revealed to Rabi'a when God lifts God's veil so that God can see Rabi'a and that Rabi'a can see God. So those are different. One is passionate and selfish, maybe passionate, selfish. The other one is just being with God, the love that comes when you are with God. And the praise for both is with God, is what she's saying. This image to the right says Huwa. In Arabic, that means he, but it also refers to God. Sometimes Sufi mystics, they chant that word over and over again, or sometimes they would add Allahu, Allahu, God is he, God is he, or just who, referring to God. But when we talk about mysticism within Islam, I should explain that the word for mysticism is, in the Islamic context, is Sufism. And in Arabic, that is Tasawwuf. In Sufism, the goal of Sufism is that your ego or self should die while you're still alive. You must achieve fana, which is this death of your ego. It means you let go of the prison of yourself, of your being. You don't want to just be by yourself. You want to be one with God. And to be one with God, you have to let go of yourself. You have to let go of your own will so that you can fully accept God's will. So what do Sufis do? Some Sufis fasted and still fast, even during times when it's not Ramadan. Took vows of silence, some still do. Practiced celibacy. Some slept on the floor to move away from the body towards God, towards this goal. Some chant, that's called dhikr. Some twirl. You've probably seen the whirling dervishes at some point. And some just sit and meditate or silently pray. If you look at the image, you see concentric circles. And so Sufism is the inside of this circle. It refers to the esoteric meaning of Islam, or the hidden or the mystical meaning of Islam. And then the outer meaning of Islam would be the exoteric, the shell. And that's where you would find maybe the rules, the regulations, the orthodoxy, that would be there. But trying to get closer to God, the experience and maybe the secrets of all of that, that would be the esoteric, the kernel. And that would be something that Sufis would be trying to get to. And Sufis are motivated by the love of God and motivated by trying to align themselves with the will of God. They try to move towards higher and higher stations, closer to God on that journey. Here's another poem by Rabi'a. And this one is called Reality. I don't know if she titled it. I assume somebody else probably titled it. But the poem is like this. In love, nothing exists between heart and heart. Speech is born out of longing. True description from the real taste. The one who tastes knows. The one who explains lies. How can you describe the true form of something in whose presence you are blotted out? And in whose being you still exist? And who lives as a sign for your journey? In this poem, I really like the line, the one who tastes knows. I think it means that you have to immerse yourself in the journey, in the Sufi journey or in the mystical journey to be able to know. And to the right, you see an image of a woman whirling dervish. Medieval sources regarding Rabi'a include several, more people than this list, most certainly. And then you also have contemporary sources, famous people that have been writing about Rabi'a in the contemporary era. But I actually wrote my master's thesis on Rab'ia al-Adawiyya, and I looked at the contributions of these four gentlemen, Abu Uthman Abr ibn Bahr ibn Mahbub al-Kinani al-Basri, also known as al-Jahiz. And then there's Abu al-Qasim Abdul Karim ibn Hawazin al-Qushayri. People often just refer to him as al-Qushayri. And then you have Abu Hamid ibn Muhammad al-Tusi al-Ghazali, and he's often referred to simply as al-Ghazali. And then Farid ad-Din Attar, who famously wrote a lot of texts that are read really often in the contemporary era, like the Conference of the Birds. They all described Rabi'a as a devoted and as, ascetic, celibate, mystical woman who prayed long hours and was completely devoted to God. But it wasn't really until al-Ghazali that the biographer, al-Ghazali really focused on her poetry that had to do with divine love. So he highlighted that contribution of her lifetime. And then not until Farid ad-Din Attar do we get a plethora of stories in which she's carrying out miracles. Of course, he lived 400 years after Rabi'a, so we don't know if all of those miracles really happened. But it's nice to think that perhaps they did. You never know. So it's Attar's version of Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, which proved to be the most influential in her contemporary representation. And he includes, in his writings, he includes, several stories. But in one that I'm going to read to you in a moment, he portrays Rabi'a as passionately praying to God. And she says, "Oh God, my whole occupation and all my desires in this world, of all worldly things, is to remember thee. And in the world to come, of all things of the world to come, is to meet thee." But let's talk for a moment about gender, because many people are really tickled by Rabi'a al-Adawiyya because there's so many funny stories about her in which she's chastising her male followers, telling them that they're worldly or that they didn't understand. And also it might be interesting to some people to realize that women, Muslim women were in leadership positions, above Muslim men, and they taught them. And this actually happened during the medieval period, if not before. Of course before, but also, during the medieval period, it was, many women and men studied mysticism together. So contemporary scholars have written about Hazrat Rabi'a, often to identify Sufism as a tradition within which Muslim women have historically been important contributors. And here you see an image, and that's the book by Rakia Cornell, and it's titled Rabi'a From Narrative to Myth. Layla Ahmed notes, the narratives about Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, for instance, exemplify distinctly counterculture elements with respect to ideas about gender. So let's think about the time period in which she lived, the Abbasid Era, which went from 750 to 1258. The Abbasid Era, I tell my students, was known as the Golden Era because it was famously, known for the development of algebra, alchemy, chemistry, philosophy, and so many other sciences and, subjects in the humanities. So if I were to time travel, I would have loved to go back during the Abbasid Era. But I don't know if I would go back as a woman, because during the Abbasid Era, while wealthy women had to spend most of their lives inside their houses, poor women were bought and sold as slaves. But certain women did fall out of the category of, quote unquote, domestic women, such as female slaves, poets, singing girls, and mystics. For example, during the early Abbasid era, Basra was a site for a school of women's asceticism, and Sufi women there were highly respected in their community. Stories in which Hazrat Rabi'a inverts traditional gender roles by refusing to marry or by scolding men have probably delighted women and challenged notions of gender in the societies in which they're told. Farid ad-Din Attar writes regarding, if anyone says why have you included Rabi'a in the rank of men? My answer is that the Prophet himself said, God does not regard your outward forms. When a woman becomes a man in the path of God, she's a man. And one cannot anymore call her a woman. You can decide what you think about that, but I think to Farid ad-Din Attar, this was a compliment. I think he meant that the worldly forms don't matter. At the end of the day, it didn't matter if she was a woman or a man, because her status as a mystic was so high. And in fact, there's a lot of gendered imagery in Sufism, in Sufi literature. There's a lot made out of the feminine, being more feminine, even for a man, makes that man more able to submit to Allah because he's more flexible. He's willing to accept guidance. He's willing to let go of his own ego. So female imagery found in this body of literature, you find it in the relationships between the Sufi disciple and the teacher. So often the Sufi disciple, the male Sufi disciple, is described as a bride, okay? And the teacher would be the bridegroom. Or the disciple would be described as a baby, and the Sufi teacher as the nursing mother, even if they're both males. So you see there was a value placed on femininity, on being soft and flexible and willing to submit yourself. Not that all women do that, but that's, those values are associated with femininity. And certainly they emphasize the value of feminine submission. Sufism is known as anti-orthodox, and it was definitely a realm in which women were able to attain a high status. And why? Again, because Sufism emphasizes the spiritual and not the material, physical, or bodily side of life. Carolyn Walker Bynum argues in her study of hagiography, and that just means the study of saints. So in her study of hagiography and gender in European medieval times, that male hagiographers described women as becoming man-like in their quest for spirituality because they, men would apply female imagery to themselves in order to give up their masculine world of power, in order to become renunciants, in order to become more mystical. Hazrat Rabi'a is usually presented in contemporary texts as being famed for her wit. Her stories are funny, and for their sarcastic and indeed at times acerbic, sharp ways in which she doled out wisdom to her male disciples and other men who came into contact with her. Sometimes she yelled at them. While in early accounts written by Al-Jahiz, Rabi'a is presented simply as a celibate mystic. 400 years later, Attar describes Rabi'a as carrying out miracles. And you see the image below is another book. This one is titled Rab'ia al-Adawiyya, Martyr of Divine Love by Abdurrahman Badawi. There are so many Rabi'a stories, and yes, I'm going to tell you some. My favorite is the story of Rab'ia al-Adawiyya and Hassan of Basra when they went to the lake. So Rabi'a, is with Hassan, and the story goes that Hassan actually wanted to marry Rabi'a. This story might be a myth, might not be true, because Hassan of Basra probably lived before Rabi'a was even born. But he says to her in this tale, Rabi'a, look at me. I can walk on the lake. Look at me. I can do this. And he's showing off a little bit. And Rabi'a looks at him and she gives him a withering look. And she takes off, flying in the sky on her magic carpet. And she looks down at him and she says, Hassan, what you can do, a fish can do. What I can do, a bird or a fly can do. What does all of this have to do with what God can do? Implying that those are just petty miracles. Then there's the story of Ibrahim ibn Adham and the Kaaba. And in this story, Ibrahim ibn Adham, he's going to Mecca to do pilgrimage at the Kaaba. And he's taking years and years and years because every few steps he prays. He stops and he carries out a few rakat of prayer. And when he finally arrives, he finds out that the Kaaba is not there. And he says, where's the Kaaba? And somebody tells him, oh, the Kaaba went to meet Rabi'a. And he says, what? How can the Kaaba go and meet Rabi'a? And, he's shocked that the Kaaba can actually move itself to go meet Hazrat Rabi'a, the Sufi saint. And then another story is about the man with the headache. So in this story, a man comes up to Rabi'a and he says, Rabi'a, my head hurts. It really hurts. And she says sharply, how old are you? And he says, 35. And she said, 35. So you've had 35 good years. God gave you 35 pain-free years. And the very first little pain that you get, you're going to complain? You should be worshiping God for those 35 years. And that's why I have the image to your right that says love for God. Clearly, the mythology regarding Rabi'a, surrounding Rabi'a, has been embellished over time. Farid ad-Din Attar, who died around 1230, they say he was killed by the Mongols. His contribution of information regarding Rabi'a is considerate. And most of the contemporary scholars like Margaret Smith and Anne-Marie Schimmel refer to Farid ad-Din's trove of stories about her life. And so you can find her stories in Tadkirat al-Awliya, also known as the Memorials of the Saints, which you can buy on Amazon, and also in Mantiq at-Tayr, which means the Conference of the Birds, which is you can also buy those on Amazon or anywhere, bookstores. And so both of which he wrote in Persian in the later part of his life. "400 years after Rabi'a's death, she's imbued with wholly new characteristics. Attar emphasizes Rabi'a's strength and superiority over men, and most strikingly, the appearance of miracles and prophet-like qualities attributed to her. Whereas Rabi'a in other renditions was a woman of supreme wisdom and piety, Attar attributes Rabi'a with the power to fly in the air on her magical carpet, and lamps are seen glowing over her head. There's a story in which, fire shoots out of her fingertips. So here I have a poem by Rab'ia al-Adawiyya. Your prayers are your light. Your devotion is your strength. Sleep is the enemy of both. So perhaps what Farid ad-Din Attar meant is that when people would see her praying so devoutly, it was as though light came out of her head. Attar had little use for social, religious, and political conventions. Along their spiritual path, his characters in the Conference of the Birds have experiences that seem to clash with traditional dogma, while in fact bring the seeker closer to the truth. Despite her gender and her humble origins, Attar's Rabi'a ranks far above any religious leader or king. It's likely that Attar's disdain for social and religious conventions, as well as for political authority, rose in part out of his reaction to the turbulent and chaotic political times in which he lived. Here's another story from Rab'ia al-Adawiyya, in which she's yelling at somebody. So she lashes out at Hassan of Basra, the same Hassan that was trying to impress her by walking on the lake. And this story is found in Tadkirat al-Awliya, whereby she, and two other Sufis debate the correct attitude towards the lash of the Lord. Hassan proclaims, "He is not truthful in his claim, who does not bear with fortitude the lash of the Lord." Rabi'a retorts, "Those words stink of egoism." So this image to the right is of a book by Widada Sakakini, and it's called The First Among Sufis, about the life and thought of Rab'ia al-Adawiyya. Well, similarly, she scolds somebody in another story, also in the Conference of the Birds, who wishes for the door between himself and God to open. And Rabi'a says to him, "Fool, to tatter so. When has the door been closed? I'd like to know." You know, why should we pound and pound on the door to God as if the door is shut, as if the door is shut? And so Rab'ia, here's an image to the right here, and it says, you know, quote, "How long will you keep pounding on an open door, begging for somebody to open it?" And what she means is that it's not shut. The door's not shut. Rab'ia al-Adawiyya here also chastises somebody. And she's saying, "You love the world very dearly. If you did not love the world, you would not mention it so much." And so here to tell, you know, for one Sufi to tell the other Sufi you love the world very dearly, you know, it's not a compliment, because you're supposed to spend, you know, all of your love should be for God. Within this context, at least. Sufyan al-Thawri said in Rabi'a's presence, "O God, mayest thou be satisfied with us?" And she said, "Are you not ashamed before God to ask him to be satisfied when you are not satisfied with him?" I think what she means is that Sufyan al-Thawri is asking God to do something as if God is not satisfied. Please be satisfied with us. Obviously, Sufyan al-Thawri is not satisfied with God because he doesn't believe that God is satisfied with him. So she scolds him for that. So those are some of the more funny stories. And also, of course, they're not only funny, they always speak to, to focusing on God, to realizing that there's no door between you and God, to be satisfied with God. But they're a little funny because she's so sharp. But she's even more famous for her comments on divine love. So let me read you some of these. "I came to know love the moment I found you, and I have closed my heart from everyone except you. And I started whispering to you, the one who sees the secrets of hearts while we don't see you." This is really a love poem. And here's another one. "Oh God, another night is passing away. Another day is rising. Tell me that I have spent the night well so that I can be at peace, or that I have wasted it so that I can mourn for what is lost. I swear that ever since the first day you brought me back to life, the day you became my friend, I have not slept. And even if you drive me from your door, I swear again that we will never be separated because you are alive in my heart." I love this, the part of this poem where she says, "I swear that ever since the first day you brought me back to life," because I think what she means by brought back to life is that she becomes born. She becomes born when she accepts God fully when she no longer feels a separation between herself and God. And that's when she comes back to life. And that's why she says at the end, "You're alive in my heart." Even though Rabi'a has suffered every disadvantage, slavery, poverty, and being a woman during the Abbasid era, she nonetheless managed, according to those who write about her, to reach a high proximity to God, even higher than men that were richer than her or that gave the appearance of being more devout than her. She's famous for her independence and for only relying on God for her needs. In conclusion, my cat is visiting me here. I'll just let it be. In conclusion, the historical Rabi'a was a celibate, devout mystic. Her legacy, shaped by those who followed, is still of significance today, as seen in the works of many contemporary scholars of feminism, spirituality, and Islam. Hazrat Rabi'a's stories are witty, funny, and noteworthy in terms of women's contributions to Sufism. So the image to the left you have is of a woman praying, and to the right, it looks like a spiral, but if you look closely, each one of those little images in the middle is of the letter Waw, which has a mystical significance. Most important of all, Rabi'a will be remembered for her descriptions of divine love, in Arabic known as muhabba. She leads the way for Muslim women and men to reach the highest level of devotion to God. Mystic, divine lover, and Sufi guide, Hazrat Rabi'a sheds light on the important legacy of Muslim women. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Pandya, thank you for this wonderful presentation. And thank you for bringing us our attention to Rab'ia al-Adawiyya, one of the very significant figures in Islamic history and Tasawwuf mysticism. Now, the one question that came to us through the social media was, can you elaborate on her contributions in Islamic mysticism and history? Rab'ia al-Adawiyya. So many years passed, 12 centuries passed. We're still hearing about her and her beautiful stories. And there's a lot to learn, just like the Mesnavi of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, from her stories as well. What are her other contributions that you didn't mention in the presentation?
Well, let me first say that many people say that she's the very first mystic. Of course, there were other mystics, but she's the first one that really talks about divine love. And you can hear it in the poetry that she recites. The poetry is not just about wanting to be with God. It's not just about, I wish I can go and submit my will to God. You know, I'm tired of the prison of my own body. I just want to be with God. The poetry is about love, almost a romantic love. Maybe it is a romantic love for God. And in fact, people have asked her, you know, famously, even the Amir of Basra asked her if she would marry him. She received several marriage proposals. And every time she would say something like, why are you asking me? You have to ask God. Because she had already submitted her entire being. She had already attained fana. She had already let God into her heart so much that she couldn't see any separation of her will and God's will. So she would say, you have to go ask God. And apparently God didn't say yes, because she remained single her whole life. And she's also famous for spending long hours praying and fasting. She would stay up all night, you know, praying and praying and praying. Oftentimes you'll see images of her just, you know, standing next to her or standing or in prayer next to her prayer mat. And you'll see the images at nighttime. And So she would, stay awake, weeping, crying, begging for union with God, sensing God. And you get the feeling that she's not just trying to practice Islam with all of the external, orthopraxy or correct practices. She actually is in love with God.
Wonderful. Now, there's a lot of beautiful commentary flowing along social media. So, but I couldn't catch them up. It was so instant that I couldn't catch them up. But thank you for this beautiful presentation, Dr. Pandya, and for your time, for having this Salaam Islamic Center webinar series in this weekly conversation about the significance and life of Rabi'a al-Adawiyya.
Thank you very much, Atilla Kahfechi, and I'd also like to thank the Salaam Islamic Center once again for having me over to speak. And thank you so much to all of you listeners who tuned in today. And take care.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too.